Ended up, the CEO got a pie in his face. So yeah, and they had protection there. They had agents there, but that happens.
But was it a loaded pie? Thanks for joining us in the studio.
Oh, thank you for having me.
All right. Welcome. You're listening to the Best of Investing on News Talk 910. This is the show where we present valuable information about real estate, the financial markets, and other economic business of the day. For those of you listening for the first time, here's our format. A few guys. In this case, we got four of us today. What are we doing? We're like, it's like we're at a bar having drinks without the drinks, but we're talking business with you, the audience listening in.
I'm drinking.
You're drinking? Okay, excellent. I'm your host, Edward. Well, we have too much fun here. I'm your host, Edward Brown, and I'm pleased to have as my co-host Mark Hanf of Pacific Private Money and Russell Rosner of Equity Coalition. And today's trivia theme is famous quotes, who said it? And today's guest is Benny Bach, who is actually a descendant of Johann Sebastian Bach, who is going to discuss the economics of climate change and how it affects business. And Russell, he was your guest, so why don't you continue on?
Well, thanks, Edward. Yeah, well, before we introduce our guest here, I just wanted to maybe frame the show slightly, which is that, this is a show about investing, and we're hoping to discuss opportunities and investment options that might be created by rising temperatures or climate change in general. I think that this really isn't a show about what's causing climate change. It's a show about, basically investing. And I think that to give a real-life example, if we all owned a store in the middle of the desert in a small town, and next week we knew it was going to pour rain, we'd probably go out and buy some umbrellas. So this is a show about figuring out what umbrella to buy, I guess. So without further ado, we have Dr. Benny Bach here. He is a physics professor and lab director at the University of Nevada. Dr. Bach was just recently in the Andes Mountains of Peru, helping atmospheric scientists take snow and ice samples, so core samples, from high altitude peaks. In addition to his academic interests, Dr. Bach is an entrepreneur who owned and founded two high-tech manufacturing firms in optics. And without further ado, Benny, take it away.
All right. Thanks for inviting me, guys.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Okay. Now, I've told you beforehand that we're very nice to our guests. We don't get, we try to get too controversial, but I do have to ask you about climate change. Okay. And let's say all of us agree that the Earth is getting warmer. So we're not talking about, whether or not it's getting warmer. Let's just all agree that it is. My question is, how much does man have an impact on that? Because we've gone through at least 5 major ice ages in the last 25,000, 30,000 years, and man wasn't driving automobiles 15,000 years ago. Go ahead.
Right. Yeah. How do we know?
So how do we know? Yeah, correct. So the climate in the past has both warmed and cooled. We've had warm periods. We've had glacial periods. Man was not the cause of those. Okay. But currently we're going through a warming period. But we don't believe that it's part of the natural environment. We do believe that it's man-made.
Okay, and why would you think that it's not natural?
Okay, so what they've done, and this is, in recent news, right? We had a scientific climate skeptic just recently change his mind when he's reviewed the data.
Now he changed his mind from saying it wasn't that there wasn't even global warming to now saying that it was global warming.
Right? He's done two things actually. So when we're referring to Dr. Richard Mueller from Lawrence Berkeley Laboratories, so he stated, yes, okay, I've reviewed the data and the climate is warming. He's also reviewed the data and he's also said, and he believes that man is mostly responsible for that climate warming.
So for all the other climate warming situations over the last so many thousand years where it warmed over 300-400 years at a time and man wasn't, I mean, it just seems to me that we're such a small part of this universe, how we could have that much
such significant impact. So, well, what he did is, one, he looked at, so we don't have records that go back 1 million years.
Sure.
Man hasn't been around. He did use records that went back to about the time of the American Revolution.
Benjamin Franklin's records, actually.
Yeah,
yes.
Correct. So we are able to look back that far, okay? So we're not really able to look back and see what man's influence was, 100,000 years ago, okay? But he did go back and he looked at the weather record, and he went back and he looked at variations in solar output, okay, because the sun could have an effect.
Sure.
He looked at variations from, say, volcanic output and what volcanoes had done in the past to change the environment.
Yeah, because Mount St. Helens in 1980 was a pretty major volcanic eruption.
Correct.
Yeah, and the temperatures worldwide went down by a few degrees right after that, by the way.
Okay.
So with their analysis, his current analysis, he is able to look at those various effects independently. So he's able to look at solar variation, solar variation does cause the climate to warm or cool.
Well, interestingly enough, when you just mentioned about how with Mount St. Helens the temperature dropped. Now, could one reason be that with I'm not a scientist, but I'm just kind of trying to add some logic here. If you have a lot of volcanic ash, wouldn't that kind of put a sort of a covering over to where the sun couldn't penetrate?
So it basically
I just got my doctorate.
You just got it.
Yeah, but there's something to say about Mount St. Helens. It was a big enough volcanic eruption to shield the Earth from the sun's rays and cool it, but it wasn't big enough to actually entrap the atmosphere for a long period of time. And in the past, you were mentioning that climate change couldn't have been caused by man because it didn't exist. 10,000, 100,000, well, millions of years ago. So what a lot of scientists are saying right now is that at least in one specific instance, a supervolcano erupted, which would have been 100 times larger than Mount St. Helens, and actually enveloped the Earth in ash to the point where the Earth heated up because it had no way to exit the temperature or the higher temperatures back through the atmosphere.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So he's able to look at the records, environmental records, weather records back a couple hundred years, and he's able to distinguish volcanic from solar from human interaction. So basically, greenhouse gases. And when you plot, what he did is he plotted that change in temperature versus humans' CO2 emissions, and those two effects track. They correlate to each other.
Okay, but wouldn't you think that over, if you want to use millions of years, I mean, I'm more of a young Earth type person, but let's take that for a minute. If you look at millions of years compared to 250 years, isn't that a really small sample, even if it's exactly correlated?
Correct. So it is a small sample.
Yeah.
But they said, if you look at the global warming, you say, well, I postulate it's human effect, human emissions, global greenhouse gases. The environmentalists, environmentally, what mechanism would you suggest, or what the skeptics would suggest for that would be the environmental cause? And they really haven't suggested
we were
one.
mentioning, just before we started about how, the Earth is traveling thousands of miles or millions of miles per hour through space. I mean, our whole universe is traveling, and just a small degree off from the sun will make substantial changes.
Yeah.
Right?
So are you referring to the orbit or the inclination of the Earth?
Well, just everything. I mean, isn't all of our galaxy traveling through space, or is it just stuck?
Our solar system, we're in the Earth's moving 900 miles out.
Okay, Mark, you haven't said anything yet. I think you're just postulating all this.
Well, I'm curious. I'm waiting to hear Dr. Ben talk about have there actually been measurements of human-created particulates that they've measured in the atmosphere that would
so
cause them to say, well, this is man-made?
Yes. So actually, people have been taking atmospheric samples for a very long time, and they've recorded these, and they have, for a very long period of time, been noticing that the CO2 has been increasing with our industrialization. So people back for hundreds of years have been taking grass samples, they've been taking air samples, and I do believe these guys were from the, I think they're from the observatory in Hawaii, and they've been taking atmospheric samples collecting samples for 60 years.
Okay, well, this is all very good stuff, Benny. Very, very interesting, and we're going to cut to a commercial break. When we come back, we'll get into the business side of things, because we want to hear about how to invest in greenhouses. No, just whatever is going to be,
not investing in greenhouses.
Yeah, there we go. That's right. Oops. I'd be on the losing end of that one, wouldn't I? Okay, remember today's trivia theme is famous quotes. Who said it? See, now we have to get to a little levity here. Okay, Here's our first commercial break. Here's our first trivia question. Who reportedly said, "Et tu, Bluto"? Oh, no, that was Popeye. What I meant to say was, who said, "Et tu, Brute"? And we will be right back. Excellent.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Good.
Yeah, that was a good point, Mark. Yeah,
Welcome back to the Best of Investing. I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with Mark Hahn, Russell Rosner, and our guest, Benny Bach. And when we cut to the first commercial break, we asked this trivia question. Who reportedly said, "Et tu, Brute"? Anyone?
Oh, the Caesars, wasn't
Caesar?
it?
One of them. Caesar's dressing. Who? Come on, which one?
Caesar Romero.
Augustus.
No, it was Julius Caesar.
Oh, that's
It
right.
was just a normal one. It wasn't a trick question. Benny,
Yes.
now that we're talking about the global climate changing, can you help us out from an investing standpoint?
Okay, so the World Bank currently estimates that the worldwide gross domestic product will probably be affected by like $750 to $100 billion a year, okay, in terms of lost productivity, lost crops, anomalous weather, floods, we're talking droughts, okay?
Disasters.
Closer. Yeah,
Disasters, basically, environmental disasters, and things that we have to spend money on to mitigate, all right? So as far as you look at that, you're like, there's an opportunity there, right? It's going to cost somewhere, like I said, between $75 billion to $100 billion a year.
Well, I know, like when they had like in oranges back in Florida, where you had, it's one of those, what do they call it, elastic demand type thing. When oranges, when everybody lost half their crop, they all made more money because the price more than doubled.
Right, lemons too.
Yeah.
Lemons too. Okay.
So basically, there's probably some opportunity there, and to figure out where the opportunities are, where the call them green growth opportunities are. I think it's useful to look at the way people use their energy. What's causing these greenhouse gases? Okay, or what's the source of the greenhouse gases? And for the average American emits about 20 tons of CO2 a year. About 50% of that is just things that you have control of. Your house, how you heat your house, how you drive, how you cook your food, what kind of food you use.
Oh, okay, I thought for a minute it was breathing.
That's breathing.
Breathing and stuff coming out the other end. Fluffing, as you say.
And then about 15% of your footprint is your work, basically. Or I should say like 25%, sorry, of the emissions is you going to work.
Like
and
in my car?
You're actually your computer at work, the power at work,
see.
the lights on need to be at work. And you don't really have all that. I mean, certainly you can influence your employer, but you don't really have control of that. Then another, about 10% of your emissions, which is about 2 tons, actually comes from public infrastructure, like lights on in City Hall, public transportation, street lights, another thing that you really don't have control over. And about 20% or 4 tons of a person's emissions, CO2 emissions, comes from actually the things you buy. And a large portion of that is actually we're not talking plastic toys or slippers, we're talking about food. A lot of those emissions come from food production.
I'm sorry, but I have to eat.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But it's
survival of the fittest, baby.
Yeah, it's true. You do have to eat, and no one's asking you to cut back on how much you eat.
Okay.
But if you eat differently, for example, the majority of those CO2 emissions actually come from the production of commercial fertilizers, and from the production of processed foods,
and also the transportation of the food to the marketplace as well.
Yeah, that's correct. Actually, the transportation is actually relatively efficient compared to the big energy hogs are actually the commercial fertilizer and the food processing. It's actually cheaper and more environmentally friendly to ship the tomatoes from California to Wisconsin than it is to have greenhouses in Wisconsin. You have less CO2 output from your transportation than if you're trying to
Oh, I see.
grow.
You mean it's better to have more greenhouses concentrated in a more productive area than to try to grow food in a place like Wisconsin, where it would be inefficient and using more fertilizer than you would need.
It takes more energy and all that.
Right.
It's more environmentally friendly to ship it there than to try to grow, it's to ship tomatoes to Wisconsin than try to grow them there during the winter.
What about just nuclear?
So
power plants type.
So nuke power plants, right? They don't emit CO2, do they?
I guess not.
They
No,
don't.
they
Right?
don't.
So
They don't.
that's a low carbon energy source, right? Though some people are not into that, but it is a potential low
We should
carbon
all have
energy
nuclear
source.
power plants in our backyard. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, Benny, and there's a whole industry, I guess, that has sprung up in the investment community, right? Around investments you can make that are basically green friendly, or there's even a Dow
Correct.
Jones Sustainability
Sustainability,
Index.
I went at that little diversion because I wanted to. So your footprint comes basically from the way you use energy. Okay, so if you wanted to invest green, if you want to look at green growth, one thing you would look at is low carbon energy sources. So we're talking solar, you're talking wind. Okay, there's one green investment sector. Another green investment sector potential is transportation. Looking at novel transportations or looking at novel technologies for transportation.
Bicycles.
Well, that's not all that novel, but yes.
Do I have to drive a Prius?
You have to bicycling tomatoes to Wisconsin? No, I don't. Yeah,
A bicycle milker too. Now that's more efficient.
Well, you know
There
what's
you go.
funny about it when you mentioned like a Prius, because I had talked to someone who is in the tire business, and they said, "Yeah, I don't understand." He goes, "We love Priuses and other car hybrids because." But it's actually bad for the environment because they go through too many tires too quickly.
interesting.
Because the tires have to be a lot thinner in order to get that good